Hello, this is the online forum of Civic Dialogue, and today we're meeting with Alexander Sogomonov. Alexander Sogomonov has been instrumental in the establishment of this school and its activity over the past 20 years, and the online seminars. And indeed, when I think about your roundtables, when there are the roundtables, when they take place, then the discussions which take place at the end of each day of the seminar, we relive the seminars and the whole world seems to be perceived anew through the prism of your roundtables, and the clarity comes because what you have been trying to impart to others is the critical thinking. Well, I think that critical thinking may be coming to us right in the evening. Well, in any event, we are starting to talk about democracy because it seems to be a somewhat blurred concept. Well, thank you very much, Sveta. Thank you for this very nice presentation and the kind words of introduction. It is a pity that this meeting is not taking place live online, but that it will be uploaded in recording. And I have been somewhat anxious about this meeting because we are having a very new audience and a truly great responsibility, even when I speak about a topic which seems to be well known to me. However, when you speak before an audience in a hall, you relieve the topic that you have broached. However, I have um, my great audience in the figure of Alexander Shmelyov, my great friend and colleague, and it will be my pleasure to look into his eyes, because in his eyes I will try to find the vindication or the refutation of what I say in terms of the form and the general format of this meeting. So I do hope that this will really be a beautiful opportunity for us to talk about a topic which we all think we hold dearly. So one more time, good evening. I do not know at what time will you be listening to this session or roundtable, so let me also say good morning and good afternoon. The topic, and I have been concerned as to how should I formulate this topic, and democracy as an invitation to a conversation, which is what the announcement for this session has been. I was trying to solve a psychological problem. On my part, it's a great challenge to talk about a democracy within such a limited time and to try and clarify some meanings. I'm not sure if I have to clarify any meanings. Maybe I will even try to obscure some of the meanings, and in this way to try to introduce some sort of an intellectual intrigue and evoke the interest in this topic with those who have not given it much thought. Secondly, many questions that the mankind has been trying to solve for hundreds of years, and certainly for the past several decades, it would be impossible to try and solve these within this format of this session. However, I have tried to talk about this because I think it is most important to talk about democracy, and we shall continue these deliberations throughout the year of the I-forum. At the end of this session, I shall try to suggest some topics for group work, which might empower our listeners to have this summary of the I session. So the word is democracy. Of the four things that make up this title, Democracy and Invitation to Conversation, everything seems to be understandable except for the full stop, because the full stop or the period is indeed the matter of this intellectual intrigue. One may say democracy, period, an invitation to conversation. So in this way, you might try to express your value-oriented view, which is indeed the general mission of this educational program. There is yet another way to interpret this. Democracy, full stop, is nothing but an invitation to a conversation. In any event, those who have participated in the seminars of this school, and those who have attended the webinars of the school, and those who have ever had any interest in this problem, know full well when an expert says democracy and only covers a little part of this vast topic, it is quite difficult to embrace this idea in one movement, in a mental exercise, to try and perceive it in its depth. So every person is bound to have some sort of unsatisfactory feeling because the topic does not seem to have been covered. I think that one of the greatest problems in any talk, in any discourse about democracy is that some people assume the responsibility to talk about democracy. Those who listen to such talk about democracy as given by some speaker tend to get some sort of a simple explanation, or as they say, democracy for dummies. Please explain to us, what is democracy? What does it give us? Why is it a good thing? And as Kipling said in the great poem, everything for the purpose of somebody someday explaining something to us. And persons, the experts, which are highly intellectual, are trying to propose some simplified explanations, or explanations per se, in this way thinking that they're making a complicated thing simpler. Democracy, and this is indeed what this whole I-forum starts with, is a topic which requires understanding and not a simplistic, rhetorical, linguistic, or else intellectual exercises which will make democracy a 2x2. Is there a 2x2 democracy? Of course not. Starting from the very beginning, what does the word itself mean? We all know the word, and I have not heard for the past 10 to 20 years. Everybody starts saying that it is the rule of people, because demos is people, and kratia or krasi comes from the Greek root for power, authority. Well, I think that there is a little bit of a mythology in this, and that's a simplification, not just a simplification, but a departure from the real meaning. The Greeks were not particularly keen to use the word democracy, at least in the sense as we use it today. When democracy today is a common concept for us, and we use this word with great ease, thinking that this is democratic, or democracy is quite a well-defined thing that you could use in an everyday speech. The Greeks were not, as I said, particularly desirous to use this. Their main purpose was, of course, the equality before the law. Democracy comes up in the Greek texts, which are trying to consider the practice of the ancient Greeks and primarily the Athenian practice. And in this sense, this is what we're seeing in the dictionaries. Before Aristotle, we only find it in a few texts, in, say, Thucydides texts, or else in Pericles' famous speech, who said that we, the Athenians, like democracy because it's rule in the name of the majority and not in the name of the minority. And this is a very good emphasis because we see from the speech of Pericles that we're talking not about the rule of the majority, but the rule in the interest of the majority, which certainly shifts the whole paradigm, shifts this concept. Now, what is demos? How do we translate this word from Greek? People. Well, generally, the Greeks used the word ethnos for people, but if I try to use ethnocracy as a synonym to democracy, this will be a source of horror. We'll all be horrified because ethnocracy presupposes suppression of one part of the society by others, by one ethnicity of the others, and this may be on a different basis, political or even physical. So two words, two peoples, demos and ethnos. Democracy is a good thing and ethnocracy is a terrible thing. So what is it in our perception that makes us misconstrue the word people? Well, I shall try to talk about this in greater detail, but for now I shall keep it as a little bit of an intrigue. What is it that the philosophers have for thousands of years, and the political leaders, they lived without having the recourse to the word of democracy. They were quite satisfied with the word of republic. So democracy as a word comes to our parlance quite late. So indeed, we can only talk about this for the past 200 to 250 years when some sort of a democratic discourse comes to the fore and philosophers and politicians indeed start to think about democracy in practical terms. And of course, immediately we've had the camp of the supporters and of the foes of democracy. And even Aristotle, who was probably one of the best persons to describe democracy, was never a great proponent of democratic procedures, because I think the great philosophers of Aristotle's time had the terrible picture of the rise and fall of the Athenian democracy, which indeed led to a terrible demise of Athens. And of course, the democracy only revived in Greece 2,000 years later in Athens with the national Greek state. So we started to use this concept in the 20th century because we started to introduce something quite new into this concept, rather than just a rule which is somewhat juxtaposed or opposed to monarchy, because it's much easier for us to juxtapose monarchy and the republic rather than monarchy and democracy. So what is it? Do we want to live in the republic or democracy? And in this sense, this is especially important in terms of sovereignty. But in the 20th century, we have lived through events and political regimes were created which were neither monarchical, neither aristocratic nor oligarchic, or else did not pertain to any of the regimes which were condemned by the 18th century philosophers, which indeed tried to oppose the regimes which we saw in the 20th century were what we call authoritarian and totalitarian governments, which indeed have all the vestiges of democracy, where the power rests with the people in all its liking, in the letter of the law, and there is no monarchy. There is no aristocracy. There are no sacred or sacral symbols of power. However, of course, the totalitarian regimes are exactly the opposite to what we are striving for, because the human is nothing. And this is indeed where I come upon this sacred cow, which is the human, because indeed we're talking about something much more important than a political regime. We're talking about an environment which gives birth to a new situation for men, for humans. So let us try to understand what we mean by the opposition of democracy and authoritarianism. Indeed, can we work back, as they say, in terms of reverse engineering and try to understand what is democracy by working our way back from the negative perception? So what we come down to will indeed be democracy. To find some simplified explanations, then such an approach would indeed make us happy, and this way we would be able to build up the concept of democracy on the refutation of the negative. And indeed, when we're talking to people and try to perceive our concepts, we have to remember that under authoritarianism, nobody is responsible for anything except for a very few people. And these are regimes which are easily created and take a long time to dismantle, but they irreversibly dismantle because they do not have one feature which the democracy has, which is the mechanism to correct one's mistakes. Indeed, we shall try to make this understand, because we have to realize that politics is some sort of a political cause which may indeed be mistaken. But the problem is that the authoritarian or totalitarian regimes are not in a position to correct and especially self-correct these mistakes. And in this a democratic society may indeed do that, revoke the erroneous path and to indeed live through this self-correction. And the last thing that I wanted to say as a kind of introductory remark is that this talk is, of course, infinite because what I will try to do is to give some very succinct statements for us to try and understand how we may talk about democracy and how we should not talk about democracy. I've never been seen as a particularly democratic person myself, but I think that there are two ways that you can talk about democracy. Democracy is a constantly changing subject. It is a constantly changing meaning. This is probably the only enigma of democracy. And I have to tell you that 5 years ago, being in this room, sitting around this round table, uh, in this great company of friends, uh, I would have been saying different things about democracy. And it may very well happen that in 5 years I shall yet say something else, which does not mean that I will be saying something more intelligent that I'm saying now, or that I was less intelligent 5 years ago. No, this perception of constantly changing meanings is correlated with the fact that democracy is a beautiful viewpoint, a kind of optics of our view of the world, of our view of the surrounding events. And these optics change. They allow us to watch and to view the world outside in through the very different lenses as political animals, as cultural animals, as and democracy cannot be explained, but it can well be understood. And this is a very important point for me to make, because I think that this is the most important thing. So we should be talking about democracy uh, and the meaning of democracy, and not about some trite things, not about commonplace truths. If you wish to speak about democracy as commonplace truths, which can well be understood, then you can only use it as an adjective, and you can say a democratic president, a democratic surroundings. So do not try to use it as a concept, as some sort of a metaphysical condition or man or society in which we live. Is it possible to attain justice in the society? The philosophers ask themselves if we do not know the principles of justice and its metaphysical foundations. So there are certain things which we take outside of our natural condition. And the talk about democracy in this sense is not a plain down to earth talk. It is always a talk which presupposes us to be thinking intensely. And it is not always that our words generate meaning, but democracy, when we start talking about democracy, it's a great pretext to switch on our civic mind and to transpose the democracy from the matter of accidental interest into a subject of your development as a human. In other words, if you wish to understand something, then you have to assume the responsibility for deepening and propagating these meanings. If you want to live in a simple world, then democracy for dummies would do. So, in this sense, we cannot help uh, understanding that there are absolute truths in democracy. And if this is the case, then with respect to democracy, we can hardly use somewhat simplistic ways of scientific thinking. So it is not possible to substantiate democracy in a scientific way. There are no laws within democracy which could be tested or formulated by a scientific method. In democracy, there is no some sort of a scientific subject or scientific explanation. Democracy is something that we do while we understand that our actions make part of this democratic process. Can we say that democracy is a problem? Yes, indeed. But The interesting thing is that we as humans view problems at different viewpoints. Let us say if my nasal bridge aches, I can understand this as just a simple man, and I can say that it is either I fell or else somebody hit me in my nose, or else there is some inflammation going on. However, at the same time, we understand that my nose, or my nasal bridge for that matter, aches because there are some biochemical or physiological processes taking place inside my flesh. But these are different viewpoints of one and the same phenomenon. So democracy, in the same way, is a cultural problem, it is a political problem, it's a historical problem, which is very important because there has never been a pure democratic format which we could perceive as some sort of a ideal. As distinct from some other political concepts, let us say monarchy can be perceived as some sort of an ideal format, such as the Sultan's rule. Democracy is a constantly changing historical tissue, so for history, that's a big problem. So, in other words, we're always trying to consider something that has existed in the experience of others, and we're trying to impose upon it our current view of the world. So, in that way, we may say that, all right, we can see what the Athenians did. I think that this will not allow us to build this system in that way. Could we say that democracy is an ideal? An example, that has never been implemented to its fullest, such as, for instance, such as communism. No. I think communism is easier to actualize or to implement. But let us take a good husband, a concept of a good husband or an ideal husband. I'm looking at you, Alexander Shmelyov, and I reminded myself of this concept because if one really goes through great critical analysis of you as a personality, we would understand in what sense you should be developing to get closer to the ideal concept. So democracy is indeed a metaphysical concept which in our secular world, in our contemporary society, allows us to consider as a viewpoint or a starting point or a way of optics. We are always dissatisfied. We are always keen to understand why are we dissatisfied or not satisfied to the fullest extent about the things which are taking place around us. So we have to apply some standards, and this very standard is being born, is being generated from this metaphysical understanding of what is democracy. And in the same way, our today's perception is such that it's at the same time legalistic, but the enigma that secret stays there. And democracy is such a problem. Democracy allows us to formulate some standards which make us understand our social life better. And I think this is the first time that I used the word society during this session, because society is indeed a condition of human action. Can we leave this condition? Well, in principle, it is possible. Can we portray ourselves? Can we imagine a person who has entirely cut all his ties with the society? Yes, it is possible, but we're clearly talking about hermits and these are very few in number. And of course, 99% of all people live a social life. They live together. So they have to understand what is living together as a political form, as a social form, and as an anthropological form. So there are three entities of democracy which correspond to this. Democracy as some sort of a society, democracy as a description of the political process and the political regime, and indeed democracy as a type of human personality. And this is something that I wanted to remind you of. In most cases, in most of all pan-European programs, starting from the end of the 1990s, educational programs pose the purpose, pose the objective, of developing a new type of personality, a democratic personality, somebody being a democratic citizen, which means that quite often in our lives we deal, or have to deal, with the so-called non-democratic citizens who are not willing to support these ideas. So if democracy is a social optics, through which we can see some standards, then we may say that these standards are generated from togetherness, and then suddenly we realize the meaning, the connotation of the word demos. Because the Greeks appear to have made a great discovery for us. They have said, or they may have thought, if you think that it is enough to have a commonality in history or commonality of language to be one people, or it may be sufficient for people together to have the commonality of customs, habits, traditions, would it make these people a demos? Probably not. It is enough for them to be a tribe, but it is not enough to be a nation, a demos. So demos was introduced to the Greek political and philosophical vocabulary with some very specific meaning, a political commonality of people, or even a civic and civil political commonality of people. And people can be people may be united on different grounds, but when we speak about a free convention or free unity of people, then there is this concept of demos that can be introduced. And here it is important to say that a population in the arithmetic sense, a population is not a synonym to the social and political core. So the more democratic a country is, the greater is the percentage of demos in this society. When there are 5 to 10% in society which are united in a free civic and political society, this is a weak democratic society. Still a democratic society, but a weak democratic society. So here there is a point number 3, which is also very important, which is a thesis to the effect that democracy is a specialized form of social contract. The contract which make it possible for us to live together. Anatole France said once, when he was asked to write a course of world history, he said, I don't need to write a book. I can confine myself to one phrase. And what would be that phrase? Anatole France said, People were born, they suffered, and they died. In this construction, in this phrase, there is no place for democracy, indeed, because people get born, they age, they suffer, and they die. Democracy as a value is impossible without contracts with others. So, in this sense, individualism, democratic individualism, presupposes the capacity of a human to live in a society, and indeed to cope with living together with others. So there is a temptation. There has been a temptation to create models, and it was not possible to what kind of models were created. So models were created, and I will just name a few. And indeed, the democracies, they're of course author dependent. We cannot say that some of these concepts are more true and others are less true. Let me give an example. Joseph Schumpeter, a well-known Austrian political economist and scientist who formulated in the 1920s the concept of democratic processes. In his view, a democratic process is a process of taking political decisions on the basis of work with political parties. He said that democracy is about competition. If you look at all other regimes and societies, we shall not see competition. And you may object, you may say, how come? There is a struggle for power under all regimes, under totalitarianism, under the Soviet rule, under the fascist regimes and other dictatorships in Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere. Of course, there is struggle for power between personalities or factions, but there is no competition, there is no struggle for the votes. So, political competition for the votes is indeed a democratic characteristic. Is it enough to have such a criterion? No, it is not sufficient, because we understand that we're only talking about an instrument. So, we are saying that there is a good instrument, and why should politics be always competitive? And if we think that in many cases, contemporary countries are not only based on competition but also on solidarity and social cohesion, that democracy makes us understand how to bring together the different opinions, viewpoints, positions, and this actual process of reaching an accord is indeed about our living together. So maybe in this case, the liberal democracy may be a recipe, which is indeed was indeed a very well spread. Widespread model in the 20th century, which is now under huge criticism. Then, of course, there is a populist model of democracy. There is the so-called negative democracy, which presupposes that democracy is such a political regime under which there is the primacy of distrust towards the government, and thus the government always has to strive for raising the trust of the society towards itself. So we can really take this ad infinitum until we come to arrive at one very important point, which is the deliberative democracy, which is, I think, very pertinent. we have always tried to uh, balance between the two principles of building a democratic edifice. One, first, as a direct democracy, when every person must participate in a political process. Let us remember that in Athens, by casting a die, an Athenian citizen had to participate in the political process. So you just have to cast a die, and after this has been cast, those who have been fallen with the lot of becoming political persons would indeed participate in governing the city-state, which is something that many political philosophers have imagined as the best way. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for that matter, thought that such direct democracy is the greatest possible way of government. In this sense, I think that the idea of local self-government today is, in a way, a recourse to this theory. There is also the representational democracy, which implies that we delegate our rights, and you know perfectly well how this works in today's world, when you delegate this to your representatives. And your representatives indeed work in our interests, or in my interest as a citizen. The end of the 20th century, it became clear that democracy is something larger. Overcoming the conflict in democracy is made through three hierarchical meanings. Meaning number one is discussion, democracy as a discussion. Two, democracy as a participation. And three, democracy as an influence. So for these three entities of a contemporary democratic citizenship to be identified and to be united into one democratic concept, a Latin word, deliberare, was taken, and of course the English deliberation comes from this, which means argumentation or discussing with arguments. So you can discuss as long as you wish. Habermas and Besset, the two founders of this concept, who show that the legitimacy of today's political process is based not on the fact that we as people are the source of power who go to vote once every 4 years, but that we participate in this process every day in different ways, but every day. We deliberate, we discuss, we want the constant of this deliberation to be observed to the extent that deliberative Democrats, their creed has been indeed described in a very specific, almost paradoxical way, whereby discussion is more, or deliberation is more important than voting. Because voting is always certainly a zero-sum game. There is no system of voting to have to satisfy the interests of all. So, but the deliberative mechanisms allow people to keep the political process as something that allow us to keep the life vibrant. Discuss and deliberate. In this sense, the public space becomes the most important instrument of democracy. because we shall always find the subjects to discuss and deliberate. However, what should be the instrument of deliberation? This should be a rational thinking. Let us remember an event which took our country to a somewhat different direction. At the moment when there was the slogans all around the country, scattered around Russia, that you vote with your heart, without deliberating, without discussing, without, as they say, switching on our minds, we voted with our hearts. Well, it may be that we continue to vote with our hearts, but in any event, voting with our hearts or not, but it appears that we gave up the most important achievement of modern democracy, which is to think rationally and think critically when you ponder any social processes. Participation starts with intellectual deliberation, and such is the greatest sense of deliberation, and such is the greatest ability of democracy to bring us closer to freedom. Because in this sense, this is a freedom of thought. If you read today's literature, and I will show this. I'm not trying to refer you to any books, but I have just several names on this slide. It would be impossible to indeed name even a handful of the books which are published on the subject of democracy. The more democratically developed a country is, and the greater is the understanding of democracy, the more time, effort, and resources does the society pay to trying and develop this discourse, develop this democratic deliberation. Winston Churchill really made a very strange point. The worst, as he said, form of government, except all the others, he said about democracy. Indeed, democracy can always be viewed as an imperfect system. Let us assume, I shall make a mental exercise. Let us assume that we're voting about the banning of fox hunting, or the fishing of sturgeons. Well, I understand that if we continue with the fox hunting, foxes will be extinct. Or if we continue fish for sturgeon, the sturgeons will die out. So I vote against fox hunting, or I vote against sturgeon fishing. So there's something rational that tells me about. But the majority of the people in the society say that leave us the fox hunting. Or let us take deer hunting. Allow us to continue with the deer hunting. So what am I to do? Because this choice is the choice of the majority, and I have to stay in the majority framework because I have to obey. But I still understand that this choice is wrong, that this choice is wrong. So what am I to do? I can only obey this choice because I have to acknowledge its legitimacy, but I have to continue and deliberate. I have to continue and discuss, and then my participation in this process will keep my autonomy because my vote was that. I still keep my dignity and my position, my freedom. And in this sense, I try to deliberate it, and I try to change it. We should not think that democracy is an instrument through which we make our life better. No, it's a mistake. When children are told what is democracy, children are often told that democracy allows us to be richer, to be happier. This is nothing but fantasizing. Democracy is a most honest political and social organization which does not promise paradise. It does not promise paradise on earth tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Participate, get involved. This is what democracy says. Everything depends on you. And think about this. If we were able, in a laboratory setting, to try and replay history according to a different scenario, this doesn't work. We always live in the history which has taken place. And als ob, as if it had been differently, as if, which is a very important category of Kantian philosophy. This is nothing but deliberation. And it bears a discourse nature, but is never a foundation for understanding that this was, or making a conclusion that this was the only possible solution. However, if we continue to discuss, and if we continue to deliberate, and if we continue to involve others into this communicative process, then our perception of democracy becomes a lot more adequate and precise. Democracy is not paradise. Democracy does not offer paradise. It does not guarantee paradise on earth. It is not God-given organization. It is not an instrument like a rocket or a tractor or an airplane. Otherwise, we would have arrived at nano-democracy. Think about that. No, democracy is a unique, in historical terms, a unique social and historic environment which allows people to keep their freedom and dignity even though he or she still have to live in the society and agree his or her interests and values with those of others. Democracy is something that contradicts itself. Democracy is something. Democracy cannot exist as an environment, it cannot exist as a metaphysical meaning if the state is above the society. The state must be subdued to the society. So keeping government in check is the number one criterion. Secondly, if there is a demonopolization of power, is a great criterion. Thirdly, it's the government rotation, for good or for worse, but government rotation is a mandatory principle. I shall quote an example which I think very important. It comes from the history of the United States when the second term of George Washington, the first American president, was coming to an end. And all of his people, all of those close to him, were asking him, indeed begging him, to go for the third term or even to stay a lifelong president. However, he was adamant and he said that he would not run for the third time. And indeed, this was the unwritten rule that got a firm rooting in America, whereby there is no third term for a US president. So in this sense, I think that government system under democracy is an open-end system. Once we start thinking about practicality or indeed expediency, we arrive right in hell, because ends justify means is truly starts the terrible path that we have all gone down quite a number of times along the human history in terms of the tyranny of the majority or the tyrannies of the minorities. We can see that today's crisis of democracy is born from the fact that in many countries people do not understand how can they influence the political process. There is no chance for the people to influence politics with the overconfident majority. And I didn't say a stupid majority, I said overconfident majority because I'm trying to be polite. So, of course, in those cases when the majorities are totally suppressing the minorities is just as sad as the situation when the minorities rule the majority. So we can try to analyze why the civic freedoms are the dearest child of democracy. But with that said, the democracy is also about the responsibilities that people have. And of course, we all talk about, we know what is military duty, the duty to raise your children, the duty to care about your old, the duty to stand and solve your own problems. These are all understandable things. But the most important duty of a democratic citizen is to influence the life around you. The subjects of an empire did not have to influence the life around them. They had enough because they were satisfied with having the cultural autonomy. The more we speak about cultural autonomy, the closer to empire we come, because in empire we see a small superstructure, and under this small superstructure in the metropolitan center there is this vast expanse of cultural autonomies. The empire is not interested in the civic nation. Democracy puts civic nation at the helm of things, and the interests of a civic nation, and indeed civic patriotism, and not ethnocratic or ethnocultural patriotism, comes as the primary principle. And of course, equality, rule of law, and independent judiciary. In democracy, by your leave, I shall get back to the very beginning of this talk. One of the most well-known works of Immanuel Kant, What is Enlightenment, starts with the phrase, do we live in the age, in an enlightened age? Kant says, no, but we live in an age of enlightenment. And he tries to answer the question of what is enlightenment in a most surprising way. The words that I have said about democracy coincide with his deliberations about enlightenment. Do we live in an age of democracy? Alas, no. But we live in an age of global democratization. This is something that makes our century, the 21st century, and when I speak about planetary democratization, this is not the only thing that I wanted to say. All processes and social processes go through what I may call a democratic temptation and a democratic test. A democratic experiment, if you wish. Democratic senses, democratic procedures permeate our lives, except for probably the family relations. But If we remember how Alexander and Svetlana Shmelyovs bring up their children, I can say that I'm myself an authoritarian parent, but they're quite democratic. So even here, I can see some democratic things creeping upon us. This is most interesting. Can the whole world become democratic at one point? Or it always has to have an antithesis to continue to struggle for its survival, that it should always have a mirror. Look at North Korea, and you'll understand why you have to live in democracy. If you think that an American would say, "I'm an American, and that's why I'm happier than a North Korean because I live in a democracy," I think this would not be quite true, because a North Korean may be indeed more sincere to say that he or she is happy to live in the North Korean society compared to these poor, wretched North Americans. Psychologists who deal with kinology say that dogs see us as underdeveloped dogs, and they have care about us. If we had walked on four legs, and if we had behaved like the dogs, they would not have to care about us as much as they do. So this is a very interesting way of transforming or switching between the states of consciousness. I would probably like to finish this little talk of mine with one thing. Indeed, today, democracy, which I indeed understand as environment, first of all, as some sort of social and political ideal, as some sort of an organization, if you wish, which permeates the culture, the social life, and some sort of a viewpoint or an optics which allow us to change standards. We do not build up standards, because paradise on earth has so-called quite interesting error. Once you create a paradise, it means that you rule out the possibility or even a chance of an error. And of course, everything changes. The universe itself changes. So democracy does not seek paradise. It always allows for a change. It allows for self-correction. And this is indeed something that we're seeing as a great test, as a great challenge. I think that you will hear this about and listen to our speakers and experts talk about this in the subsequent sessions of our I-forums about the great challenges for globalization. Excuse me, the great challenges for democratization and the democracy in the world, because the societies on the one side live in a global continuum, and in this sense, if people are unsuccessful, if they fail at something, then people, in a natural way, start to criticize the standards or the norms. That's why the Western standards are heavily criticized. We want to have something sovereign. Indeed, there is no such thing as Western democracy, Eastern democracy, Western or Eastern varieties of democracy. It's a universal thing. But the people who only wish democracy for dummies would say that no, we need a recipe. But indeed, if we failed, that means that we were to blame. No. Those who purport to be the critics say that such criticism is necessarily shallow. Look at the processes in Europe. Cyprus comes to the helm of government with quite anti-European slogans, and people voted for him. People voted for the meanings. But on the second day in government, he started to act differently. And he can't help doing otherwise, because any government is in the field of political freedom of political choice, but still bound and contained by the international framework and the events of the international relations. So democracy as freedom of will is a wrong concept. Democracy is not a freedom of will. Democracy is a concept which is, of course, in contradiction, which is, of course, a pluralism of opinions. Human. One of the great contemporary German poets, I'm trying to remember his name, he writes, he wrote in blank verse, and he was writing a great anti-obscurantist verse. He said that the fraternity and everything angelic would have been possible in the world had it not been for a human. So indeed, he makes this great conflict. He portrays this great conflict between a person who needs his fridge in the kitchen to be full, and he juxtaposes it with the lofty notion of a human. And indeed, democracy can only be the product of people who can think critically, who can think rationally, and who can have a high educational level. Countries such as, say, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and India, who create great democratic history in their societies, they are, of course, opening these venues and vistas for education, but still, in a very interesting way, these oppositions are seen as the very fabric of today's life. Democracy is, in a way, the most illusory arrangement. It's the most illusory civic and political organization of the world, except for all the others. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Alexander Sogomonov. We have several questions. We have fewer questions compared to the number of questions we would have certainly sported had it we been online. But most of the questions you have yourself you have already responded to. One question is something that I will try to react to myself. There is one of the questions starts with saying that among the top 10 prosperous countries in the world, 8 are monarchies. And then there comes an example and a quotation from Benjamin Constant, who said that there are 4 estates, which is, of course, the executive, the lawmaking, the legislature, and the judiciary. And the 4th one is balancing estate. And indeed, monarchy may be viewed as such a balancing estate or branch of power. My only response, my personal reaction would be that it is important to differentiate between regime and a form of government. I think that monarchy is regime, but democracy is a form of government. Republic may be democratic or undemocratic, and monarchy can be democratic or undemocratic. Do you think I'm right? Am I right in this? Oh, of course, I think you're quite right in saying that. I think that of those countries which are the most prosperous and well developed, showing a high level of civic participation and those monarchies, as you said, all these monarchies are rudimentary. And these monarchies are indeed a part of this ritual of the state machine, but certainly not a practical determining vector. And I would like to remind you that I said earlier today that when you have when people had to emancipate from aristocratic or rule or oligarchy, it was sufficient for people to cry out, "We need republic and not monarchy," because democracy is indeed a self-correcting path. It's something that I would call an illusory state of the society, and in this sense it takes us forward. So I would not go as far to say that democracy is about some specific regime. And I think that I believe that in no country of the world there is a ideal democratic procedure. And such a procedure is the basis. A monarch may be proposing something, but because there are no democratic procedures which are ideal, I think that we're all in the process of search. And we have to understand that a republic, which is opposed to monarchy, or the branches of government, the branches of power opposed to each other, are the essences of the political format or the political arrangement. Whereas when we speak about the relations between people and the cultural, social, political, and civic environment, meaning ourselves, our deliberation, and our participation. If we agree to some of the rudiments of the Ancien Régime or of the old times, which bring us some exquisiteness, there is no problem about this at all. I personally see no reason to have these rudiments, but I think that the Pope of Rome or the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church may well be elected by casting a die. So these are just different planes, and these are different understandings. But I do not see much problem in this. By the way, I have received several questions from Mr. Grecheninov, from Mr. Tishenko. Thank you, Sveta, for giving these to me. I think that the opposition of the so-called oligarchy. Oligarchy is indeed a great challenge to democracy, but you have to realize that the existence of these people and their participation in the elaboration of the political course is a sign of insufficiency of the communicative and the deliberative space, which is the space for deliberation, and the insufficiency of our instruments. The dystopia portrayed by Robert Sheckley about the future of democracy in America, when the president was seen to have a briefcase not with a button for a nuclear bomb. The president must have exploded if any citizen were to be unhappy about the president. So this one has to seek balance. Democracy may be well balanced or indeed quite disharmonic or non-harmonious. We always have to consult the majority. Any democratic politician has to rely upon the majority opinion, but not all decisions are taken on the basis of the majority vote. Of course, the entry or accession to the EU does require a referendum, but accession to NATO does not require referendum. If you take the issue of capital punishment, then capital punishment or the indeed moratorium or abolishment of capital punishment is never and has never taken place through referendum, because any referendum would not allow the government to abolish capital punishment. So indeed, it is the matter of democratic participation and deliberation, let me emphasize this one more time, is the greatest important criterion. I think that democracy, in the sense as we spoke about this, is, and one of the reasons why I call democracy is an illusory environment, is that this is the only alternative to a Christian notion of agape, or the Christian knowledge of love, because democracy is built upon the precepts of cultural and political empathy. It is based on the preconceived principle of a liking for your neighbors. And in this sense, the achievements of the contemporary democracy, such as the attempts to be tolerant, such as the attempt to be politically correct, all of these things, and of course the deadlock that the world has in many ways entered today, and the great concern about the world where we are has led to creating an inner contradiction. Because people are, of course, consumers, and on the other hand, the position of a citizen. And in this sense, there are people who understand and who have lived through these democratic values, and on the other hand, people are consumers. So people indeed have to necessarily gibber between these poles. But once a person makes or indeed leave this circle, then violence becomes inevitable. Indeed, we live through difficult times. Democracy has never created paradise and will never do. There are actually more questions. I shall try to be brief. There is a question from Alexander Krichaninov. One of the questions is, Sasha Christianin is the person who likes to argue with you. A Democrat, yes. But he was... Sasha, continue, please. What I would like to ask myself, when you spoke about demos, about the criteria of demos, is it different from the concept of nation? No, not at all. Except that the Greeks did not have the concept of a nation, but their demos is indeed maximally close and adequate to our contemporary concept of a civic nation, except that the Greeks, of course, had a great importance of the commonality of religion. However, when you look at the emergence of the contemporary European civic nations, you will see that the religious factor played an important role, just as much as in Protestant and in Catholic countries. But that's just a separate topic. And by the way, those who are interested in this, I would like to refer to the book of Alexei Mikhailovich Salmin, which I think was published by the Moscow School, which has a very interesting deliberation about this. So, talking about nation, are they democratic values in international politics? Or maybe such values only exist for the demos, for one's own nation, and the democratic values are not expanded to encompass the neighbors, not to encompass the neighbors. Well, this is a very sophisticated question. What I will try to say is both yes and no. Um, the parallel I will try to, the analogy I would like to try to make is that a person who is bringing his or her children in a very democratic way, but sometimes gets quite angry and shows and as it and I think that in that same way, up to a certain point, there is an understanding that the importance of respecting the democratic structures has a great importance. So I think that international relations in international politics, the democratic approach is only starting to develop. It has never been in existence. Democracy has always been perceived as an internal thing. But nowadays, it is starting to develop in international relations. Geopolitics is a very difficult thing. It is not an easy concept. But in modern geopolitics, I think people are less talking about the so-called expediency of the 19th century, such as realpolitik and the division of countries, the annexation of territory, the migration of peoples, the fight for sovereignty, the propagation, domination, and suppression. These have always been the major purpose of all wars. Yes, they do exist. Such geopolitical concerns will not go away. But I think that democracy is very gradually making a way into the international relations. For one of the reasons being is that there are more and more international forums. Our rule of law, after all, is a continuation of the international law. But of course, Sasha might have asked for a simple question. I will try to say that democracy was hardly an instrument in geopolitics yesterday. It is hardly an instrument in geopolitics today, but it may well become an instrument in geopolitics tomorrow, because its importance is waxing, it's increasing. We will talk about this in October when we pass on to the issues of civic society and civic participation, and as well as the global civics. Today, we are trying to see that in international politics, the prevalence of a human is less obvious. However, I think that the emergence of global civics is a very interesting phenomenon. Degrowth is a term I would like to mention. Not degradation, but degrowth. When let's say growth of economy, growth of resources, growth of influence is not becoming an end in itself, but is rather seen as an ancillary to the development of the human capital and the human potential, which is something that we're seeing in the international arena. We are not prepared so far to see the full-fledged role of the human factor in international politics, but I think if and when we formulate this, we will be able to be more demanding with respect to our governments. But as long as the citizens do not formulate the deliberative demand for democratic foundation in the international relations, there is hardly any reason to ask for more. Oleg Bezrukov from Kaluga region formulates a question from the central Russia. Is democracy possible under such highly developed technologies and spin doctoring? Well, it's an excellent question. This is the technological development. Technologies are, of course, becoming a great challenge. And to those who think, I would like to refer you to the dystopia of Evgeny Zamyatin, which is called We, which came from the precept that freedom and autonomy of a human is not possible in a highly technological constructions. But love has indeed broken this authoritarian system, and I think that Yevgeny Zamyatin has a great view and a great understanding of this. So technologies must be put in check. Technologies must not be allowed to master us, and this is a most important problem. Indeed, if we perceive democracy as just a plain instrument or a plain form, then inevitably we shall be reduced to a technological perception of the society. And indeed, in this sense, we shall not see how we can coexist with the technologies. Indeed, a love of one man for one woman and love of one woman for a man, the empathy will indeed not disallow the technologies to kill us. A question from the Volga region. How does civic activity in the online world influence the offline world? Well, we shall speak more about this, but I do not know a single other instrument which would have been more active or triumphant in the deliberative democracy than the online forums. Today, it is one of the best things that the internet has brought. But of course, internet, as any other technology, creates and provides great responsibility, possibilities, and opens great vistas. But at the same time, internet is a field where you can find anything. You encounter very many negative things. So instrument is indeed only an instrument, which is a great reflection of the offline society, so to speak. So if there is a certain degree of one or another thing in the society, then it will be duly reflected in the internet space of that very society, because the bans are lifted in the internet, and in this sense the internet is interesting to us as to the analysts, but we have to discuss all the ways of how we can work with the internet. If I may pass on to our groups, if you ask me two more questions, I'm only talking to the members of the I-forum and not those not those who have just decided to listen to us without any participation. No, I'm only talking to the I-forum participants, taking this for credit. You, dear friends, will have a very important series of projects to prepare by the end of this year. We shall be doing this in the following way. You will have two nannies, let me call this such. One is called Svetlana Shmelyov, and the other nanny is Alexander Shmelyov. They will be giving you pills, and they will be making you injections. So they will be prompting you to be more active. The foundation for your success will be in your work. If you all confine yourselves to individual work, then you don't stand much chance to be read. If we remember a great old joke, for the kids not to mock us, we have to open up and work in groups. You can create groups on territorial principles, you can create groups on a commonality of topics or subjects, and I would like you to subdivide into groups, and if you believe that you want to make an individual project within each group, this is perfectly fine. However, we would mostly appreciate you to work in groups. And I spoke about democracy as a standard environment and indeed social optics, which make people work together, which allow people to engage into collective teamwork. So I would like to offer you 5 directions, and we shall meet 3 or 4 times throughout this year, and I will be giving some talks, but I will also be reacting to your group work and to your individual projects. In the end of December of 2015, we shall make some results, and we shall try to summarize. And we do hope for this summary, these results to be positive. I am delineating 5 directions, not 5 subjects, but 5 directions. And it's fine that you may have as many groups as you wish. And this will indeed be up to you. But I'm giving quite wide formulations for you to make a substantiation and some sort of a narrow project. A project implies a wide substantiation and a narrow project. You can make this as PowerPoint presentations, better than Word documents. It would be good to have some sort of presentations in slides in concise form. Our next meeting will be in June. You will have 2.5 months to start your work. You can agree on the specific approach. You can work on a framework concept, and you may um, work on some sort of, as I said, a narrow project. So the important thing will be uh, the uh, the important philosophical observation, or as I said, a wide substantiation and some sort of a practical manifestation. Democracy allows us to make discoveries on a constant level. The first direction that I'm interested in, and I may not be very successful in formulating this, but the first direction is democracy protects itself. Democracy protects itself. You understand what I mean? You are already asking these questions. You're asking about the threats to democracy. You're talking about the challenges to democracy. So those who wish to deal with democracy protecting itself, you will be deliberating about galloping democratic culture development, the internal and the external threats, and how these threats can be precluded in the same way as, say, the American experience of democracy was implemented as in the form of amendments to the Constitution. And of course, each of the amendments to the US Constitution is nothing but an attempt to protect the democracy itself. But what is to be done with indeed some threatening amendments? So indeed, what should we do to make democracy protect itself? I'm not entering any kind of correspondence with you, but towards the beginning of June, I would like to receive from all groups which deal with this topic a page per group where you would substantiate your thesis, your hypothesis, and then we shall try to make it more coherent. Direction number 2, vocal democracy. Now, this is a very interesting thing. We've always put this into dependence. In the European paradigm, this may be different, but if we see democracy in the central, so the triumphant in the same way the democracy coming. What if nothing happens in the center? What can happen in the regions, in the so-called provinces? How can we understand provinces not in the geographical terms, not as some sort of a urbanistic thing, but how can we perceive local democracy? Local democracy, and how can local democracies be created in the internet, in the how, where do we live, or where do we go? A local democracy will be the name of this direction, and there can be as many groups as you wish. How can a democracy be developed in say, towns, rural areas, localities, municipalities? What is local democracy? Who needs local democracy? Maybe nobody needs it. Direction number 3. And the third and the fourth directions would be formulated as such. We have recently spoken at length about the lacking democratic culture. Of course, democratic culture is always lacking, but when we speak about something which is missing or lacking, that imparts an almost medical dimension to the discussion. But the third direction would be what are the projects which allow to develop democratic culture in our society. You are and you will be coming from the concept of democracy as an illusory format, and that's something that we've spoken earlier. But indeed, there will still be a practical edge to this direction. What are the projects that can be qualified as local democracy? So it's up to you. The fourth direction is the civic society. The civic society is still ahead of us, and we shall not be talking about this now, but those in the I-forum, which represent the civic organizations in Russia and from other countries, try to understand and to present what are the ways to create a civic society which would be able to put the government in check. And this is not something that I can deliberate on for too long because we still have the civic society subject in front of us. But I will be glad to talk about this either via Skype or in writing. And indeed, I am fine with my internet equipment. And finally, direction number 5. We know and we see how the modern societies suddenly, which were quite tolerant, radicalize and become intolerant. Indeed, this is something that we are seeing in the world. Yesterday we were brothers and sisters, and today we become intolerant. Yesterday we could put up with people from the Caucasus, and today we start to hate them. Yesterday we were saying that we need to integrate the Muslims, and today we're saying that the Muslims need to be chased away. This is something that you can see in the Western Europe, in the prosperous Western Europe. It is becoming just as intolerant as some of the more radicalized societies. It is, of course, the responsibility of the state to quench radicalism, but no state, no government can do it alone. However, no state has any instruments except for coercion. Coercion is the only way for any government, for any state to solve the problem of, say, intolerance. The so-called houses for the intolerant, for those who are intolerant, for the xenophobes, for those who are, say, too unwilling to live in the society with those who are different from you. So my fifth topic, my first theme would be anti-extremism as the most important scenario for the 21st century. Anti-extremism is something that I would like to call is our reaction to the destructive actions and plans. Any destructive behavior, any destructive perception based on extremist ideas must be challenged and must be solved and indeed chased away by the society itself. So anti-extremism is my direction number 5. We shall meet again in the middle of June. Thank you so very much for your attention. Just a few words to summarize this session. I cannot say I have recently reread the letter of Vladislav Inozemtsov in our book published by the school, which is called The History Teaches. And one of the reasons that Mr. Inozemtsov quotes for the absence of a meaningful and tolerant dialogue in this country is indeed the inability or unwillingness to listen. Do you believe that democracy is being here and now? Is when we know the past, when we know history, but we do not live with history. When we think about the future, we do not live in future, but we think about this. But democracy is being here and now. I think you said it quite beautifully. Yes, indeed. We cannot live in the future. Future to us is seen as a very engineering, almost a technocratic thing. In 2014, Wall Street Journal launched a very interesting project, having offered to a multitude of experts to write about the development of different branches of knowledge, and it spoke about the future of medicine, the future of housing, the future of transport. We shall be new nomads of the 21st century, but not a word about democracy, not a word about this is something that we cannot foresee. This is not something that we can prognosticate. This is the future, which is built on other foundations. And secondly, democracy is not a science. I said it earlier. So in democratic discourse, there is no absolute truth. This is not something that we can see in the scientific discourse. But still, are we right in if we stop talking about the truthfulness of democracy? No, but the truthfulness or the truth or the verity in democracy is the foundation for this metaphysical edifice with such simple word, democracy, the democratic illusion, the autonomy, the dignity, and the ability of men to stand master of his destiny. Participation and involvement. It is not that we're going to involve by coercion. The truth is that men or human is the starting point. And if we create an environment where there is more and more democratic civic spirit, then human is becoming the true summit, the true crown of things. So indeed, it is not as if we live here and now, we speak about democracy, and we shall speak about this during the future sessions, and next time we shall meet next Monday, and our meeting will be with Ivan Krastev. Thank you very much, and we shall see each other on Monday.